So this is another run through of the Dow. Nice and quick again, hopefully. So Apple, no real change here. I mean, you can see has been struggling for any real momentum over the last few weeks. This relative being the key chart. Still very little bounce there. Probably was a bit stronger yesterday, which was the first time in a while you've seen any sort of relative strength within tech. An interesting candle, I guess, given the weakness maybe in some of the other prior leaders like the Nvidias and the semis. So we'll see what that develops into next week. I mean, it's still weak overall. Not a lot of conviction. Maybe it gets some relative buyers as other groups take a break, but we'll see. It still looks like it's going to take some time to work through this kind of phase, and it's I think you'll have time to get into it. Amgen, probably interesting now. It's retraced all of this. It's back into the 200-day. You would think that that's a spot where it should find some relief. So there could be something there next week. This relative still pretty poor, or disappointing. So more of a tactical than anything longer term. Amazon has held up better than most in tech, but it shouldn't be a surprise that it's struggling up here. I mean, you're right into the all-time highs. It's come a long way. If you think of somewhere like Meta or Nvidia or whoever who have done a similar journey but are well above it already, so this is kind of just slightly late to the party, and I think it's just going to take some time to hold up here. Look, it eventually works higher, but it's just going to grind here for a little bit, I would think. American Express, very strong yesterday. I mean, there's no doubt that it's not certainly yesterday's session wasn't a panic of sell everything because Nvidia is struggling. Very strong moves in lots of these names, so that still looks like it's in a trend phase. Will there be some gyrations? Absolutely, but certainly working nicely. Boeing, look, it's just like Apple. There's all the reasons in the world to think that it's 200 holes and hangs around, but it just doesn't have the bounce. There's no, intraday, any of these little rallies are getting sold, and I think it's going to do well to avoid a kind of an extension below this area. So it's definitely one that you need to be cautious or careful with. CAT, like I guess in stark contrast really to Boeing, way more advanced, trying to trend. It's a bit far from the moving averages for a name like CAT, but nonetheless it's good strength, and this relative is just trying to get out of that range, so potentially interesting, but probably a bit too extended. CRM, better than most in tech, but I think it's a little bit like the kind of comment around Amazon that it's maybe just got to this level post too big a move, and just a pause here would be fine. Don't see huge pullbacks, just sitting there would be just fine. Cisco, a bit better again. You kind of saw that defensive rotation within tech Friday or yesterday, but the relative is still pretty weak. Chevron, I think this is still working. It's not dynamic or fast, or the relative is just fine without being anything majorly positive, but you're still playing for this pattern to resolve this way into this oval, and you have a higher low now on the weekly. It still needs to get above this moving average, but it's beginning to tighten up, and probably still think that can resolve to the upside. Disney, very tight in this little, we talked about this last week, that this kind of area was always going to be, it had a little bit of a head fake outside of it, which I'd say caught a few people, and has come back in, but equally it didn't get anywhere near this 106 this week. So hopefully it can get above this 114. If it does, I think the path higher is very clear. Will be disappointing if it resolves lower, and then if it does, I think I don't think you're going way back here, but you might just have to hang around again. And so you can see though it's not a clean name. It's not like a brilliant trend. So that's why it's getting, finding it hard to get out of this little rut, but hopefully it will. Dow improved, solid. Goldman's, yeah, that's like, looks like it's gonna be pretty disappointing from here if it can't get to this 422, 430. So you've got a little bit from where it is now, trying to get out of this. It's a bit slow. Like, you'd like it to be doing this quicker. The relative is drifty, but maybe it can be one for next week. Home Depot, kind of similar. Looks like it's going to try and get back to that 400. No breakout on the relative, which is slight negative, but again, the relatives are a bit skewed at the moment with kind of a lot of influence from the denominator. But it's fine. Again, not super spectacular at the moment. It's better above 400 than it is kind of just in this range. Honeywell, solid on the week, but again, just messy overall. No clear kind of pattern or change in trend. IBM, I mean, it's one of the standout names in tech, to be fair. This gap has extended. It made a new high on the week, and yeah, for something that's been dormant for so long, it's certainly sparking to life. So for the first time in a long time, I'd say you're seeing people properly interested in IBM. Intel, not as clean. The worry you would have with it is that it didn't really get the bump that others got in semis, and it probably might struggle if the group just takes a breather. But it's still above this 42. It's still above the moving average. It's still above the trend line. So I don't think there's like alarm bells or anything like that, but it's just disappointing that it's not further advanced prior to probably what we're going to get now. Was a little bit of a pause, but it's okay. J&J, the relative still weak, trending lower. The absolute is probably okay. I mean, this area here, which is around the 155 area, like, that's been pretty solid support. There's just not a lot of directional movement. I think if it was above this trend line here, which is the channel at 170, it starts to look a lot more interesting. So we've got to wait for that, I think. But I think it's absolute level, it's fine. The relative would just put you off. JP Morgan, pretty solid, new highs and extending. You can see it like American Express, JP Morgan. We'll see it with the Visas and MasterCards later. They're all in decent shape. Coca-Cola is really just J&J, or similar. Needs to be above this 62. If it is, I think you've got a real clear path to 70 and you're into a new, better phase. The relative, it's pretty far enough back that it's maybe a bit interesting now, kind of coming back into these 2021 lows. Definitely if you get some sort of rotation from tech, which may happen, looks fine. So I think as a staple, it's a solid option. McDonald's, similar to Coke, relative is poor, making new lows. The absolute is pretty solid, and we're probably only a few percent from a new all-time high. See if that comes, which would be kind of clear in 300. So look, it looks like an easy one to sit in, but the relative will tell you it's not the leader at the moment anyway. 3M, yeah, just never, always promises and never delivers, so not one to focus on. Merck, yeah, look, again, it's a good move. It's definitely the price action in the last week or two has been jittery. Popped up, failed, and has come lower. Now, it didn't break it. It held this area here, so I think it's very narrow and very tight, but this is your spot. Can it hold? Keep holding this gap and build a new range up here with this 122 as a support. You'd think it can, because this is a good breakout. It's a good trend. It's been 2 or 3 years in the making, and it would be a shame if this was just to let that all go. So be surprised if it doesn't reset. Microsoft just has done nothing in the last few weeks. I mean, it's given the move it's had, hardly a major negative. Just consolidating up here, very close still to new highs. So it's still that's the trend would still suggest that it's going to go up there. How long it takes is kind of a harder question to answer. The relative here has kind of drifted a bit, so you can see it not being the leader since kind of February as other things have taken over. That might change, but yeah, we just see, look, it's hanging around, it's above all the moving averages. I would say it's just the longer that we can hold and consolidate up there, the more chance we extend further. Nike, yeah, just, you can see it, it's like a few, there's no power behind it. The relative is telling you that is definitely the case. The tell was it couldn't get over this 125 and has kind of really had no bounce since. We're going to need to see a big shift in, big reversal type candle to kind of change this. I think you need to be long. I think you need it above 110 up here. It's a better, action up there than it is probably trying to pick it down here. So not one that for focus at the moment. Procter & Gamble, I guess in contrast to Nike, very impressive. Close to getting about out of this little range, and if it does, your new highs, and it's a staple. It's going to look pretty decent, I'd say. Just a few more left. Travelers, like the rest of the financials, pretty good. This big gap, which was here in mid-January, has held. It's been pretty good since then, and it's tried to extend, so that's impressive. Relative is fine, so yeah, it looks a pretty solid option. United Health, yeah, we talked about this last week a bit. We'd still worry on this one, mainly because of what we're seeing in the other names in that group, like the Humana in particular. The relative is very weak, new lows and breaking down a bit. You would think that this bottom end of this range at 450 is definitely going to happen. Certainly relative, the relative here has done a very good job of keeping you out of it, and I would suspect it reacts at 450 if it gets down there. But whether you're kind of, you could argue could be early stages into kind of a bigger move, but maybe it's too big for a name for that type of action in this market. But definitely heading for 450, I would say. Visa, strong, albeit the relative is not as good, and it's a good bit from the moving averages, so this probably slows down a little bit over the next few weeks, but we'll see. And finally, last two, Verizon, pretty solid bounce here, but it's just neutral relative, and if you look at the long term of Verizon, there's been a million of these type of potential recoveries that just eventually fade, so it's not really a focus. And the final one is Walmart, which did act well last week, had numbers, made the push, few little moments of doubt, like this was the earnings candle and that wasn't great, but you could tell it reset quickly, and even just last week it managed to gap again, so that does look like it wants to go higher. And you look at the kind of phase it's been in here, you're quite a while. It's 2020 to 2024 going in that range, so it's only just out of it, so you would think that could have more. So it looks like one that's worth tracking closer. Relative obviously not super, but not a disaster either. So so look, I think we'll see next week. Obviously Friday was a bit of a messy day with the first time you've seen some real sort of selling in the prior leaders and the kind of momentum names, but it's not broad based. I thought it was pretty well contained yesterday with other groups taking over, and look, I think that's going to be very healthy. Whether we get that all week next week, we'll see. But I would still think just trying to focus on where there's a bit of relative strength will be good on a forward basis. So that's definitely going to be the focus.